Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the seventh edition of the Indegene Digital Summit. My name is Sameer Lal, and I oversee enterprise medical solutions business at Indegene, and that comprises of medical affairs, regulatory, safety, and market access. This year's theme for the Indegene Digital Summit is From Chaos to Clarity and Better Decisions. As in the previous years, you'll get honest, practical perspectives bringing together global leaders for meaningful, real time exchange. Get ready for well structured discussions that bridge geographies, perspective, and ideas. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to the keynote panel discussion titled From Discovery to Patients Innovation at the Speed of Trust. Technology is reshaping every corner of our industry, from how we discover and develop medicines to how we ensure their safety and ultimately how patients experience care. The themes that we'll explore in the next 45 odd minutes include how emerging technologies can shorten the cycle from discovery to clinic, what the gaps are, how pharma can harness new tools, especially agentic AI, how technology, and that includes AI, real world data, signal detection, etc., is changing how scientific exchange is evolving, adverse events are reported, and regulatory submissions are being managed. With more data and technology comes risk, patient privacy, data security, regulatory risks, algorithmic bias, transparency, etc. We will discuss some of these too. Finally, how can leadership foster innovation, cross-functional work, talent acquisition, reinvention and reimagining of jobs, creating a risk culture, regulatory agility, as well as foster collaboration between academia, industry, startups, etc. To discuss all of these and more with us today, I'm pleased to actually introduce two leaders who bring unique perspectives on this transformation. Welcome. First, Dr. Aida Habtezion is the Adjunct Professor of Medicine at Stanford and who was till recently Pfizer's Chief Medical Officer and Head of Worldwide Medical and Safety. She brings a deep background in medicine, especially internal medicine, gastroenterology, and immunology. Welcome, Aida. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I also welcome Robert V. Brown, who's Pfizer's Senior Vice President for Digital, and he oversees architecture, platforms, portfolio, and innovation. And he's leading the digital and technology platforms that power safety monitoring and regulatory excellence across the globe. Together, Aida and Robert sit at the intersection of science, safety, and technology. And then over the next 45 odd minutes, we'll explore with them how innovation is changing pharma, what it means for patients, and where we are headed in the years to come. As we start the discussion, please do put in your questions in the Q&A window, and we'll try to get to some of them at the end of our discussion. So with that, let's get the discussion started. I'd like to start with getting to know our panelists better. And Aida, first you, as someone with a background in academics who moved to pharma leadership during the pandemic, what lessons have you learned about leading through uncertainty, scaling up the innovation, and fostering cross-disciplinary collaboration?
Thank you, Samir, and also thank you for having me on this panel with Robert V. Brown, and very exciting and very timely topic to discuss. So, where do I start in terms of, as you mentioned, this was a time where we all lived such an unprecedented time, a global pandemic of that scale. Who would have imagined? At least in this century, and the lives at stake, the urgency and chaos and everything else. So, but I like to think, and it was the case as well, is that every challenge comes with opportunity, certainly for learned lessons, but innovation and growth. So leading during this pandemic really did underscore the importance of agility, resilience, focus. And I think a key driver, I would say, is also to be purpose-driven. I think this was important because we had a purpose, we had a focus, we had an important problem that we needed to address. But I think at the same time, it's not only having a clear vision, strategic thinking, but I think the soft skills also matter in this case. That is to be very active in listening, effective communication, and definitely empowering teams goes a long way. And I think with what you mentioned with regards to innovation, that comes with a cost, right? Cost of investment. And I think if we did not have the investment that had been, on science, medical, and technology, as well as many of the functions and infrastructures, we couldn't really deliver, right? So I think coming back to those critical steps is that investment in science, medical technology, et cetera, is so critical and so important. As well as the other thing that you mentioned is this cross-disciplinary collaboration or partnership, I think, between different sectors, because that is realizing that a solution comes from open-mindedness, taking bold steps, and acknowledging that you need diverse functions and expertise to accelerate innovation. And one important thing, because I'm a physician scientist, so it takes me to my core values of patients, is that I want to highlight the importance of bringing the voice of the patient and communities. I think this is also very important because this is the community, the patients that we intend to serve, right? The problems or diseases that we are trying to address. So this alignment is also important. So these are all the important lessons, I would say, and I think I'm continuing to learn.
Thank you, Aida. I want to come back to the piece of the purpose-driven efforts as a little bit of innovation. But before we get there, Robert, in contrast to Aida, you have been a tenured person, right, in pharma. And how have you seen the evolution, and especially the ask for the business and the tools that you have at your disposal?
Well, first, thanks for having me, and I love being on this panel with Aida. As far as your question is concerned, I've been in this business probably about 38 years. And when I first joined, technology basically was back office, trying to get invited to the party. It was like, why do you guys need to be here? Technology was not at the forefront. And I can tell you, fast forward now, and it's the first thing that people refer to now. It's like, where's my technology? Why isn't that right here in my hands? And we need to be moving very rapidly. I think what AI has done for us and for everyone is that it has invited everyone to the party, because it used to be that the technologists would do their thing, they would get their business, get the requirements, and go off and do their thing. Now the business is asking to be involved in the requirements gathering. They want to learn the tools. They want to know how they can develop technology themselves without having to get an army of technology people in the room. Now, the combination that I'm learning to enjoy now is that when you get great technologies in the room with great business people and we can prototype very rapidly, instead of doing something for multiple years, we're now in weeks and months versus years and years of like capital investments that we don't see come to fruition for 4 or 5 years. What you're seeing now is, can we get something up in 2 or 3 weeks? Can we test it? Can we look at it? Can we turn it around? And that's probably the biggest change that I've seen so far in terms of the evolution of the ask from the business to getting to the tools and disposal of the technology.
Thank you, Robert. And I think the key piece about failing fast is very important, right?
Yeah.
So that you learn even in failure. And I think that's been a key piece with technology. But before I kick off, Robert and Aida, I think I represent the audience, and we want to thank you for your leadership in Pfizer, because I think the pandemic years got the focus back on innovation and the pharma industry, which has always been known for, right? I think it's been those years are phenomenal to showcase why the industry was formed in the first place, right, for the betterment of patient, like you guys mentioned. So with that, let's get into some specific examples. I think our audience are keen to hear from you guys, right, and from your experience directly on the ground. And let's start first, Aida, perhaps from you, and then we can have perhaps Robert's supplement, right? So how do you actually balance speed versus safety, right? And especially when we're dealing with patient lives, when we're trying to introduce new technologies into the workflow, and especially, as we all know, we're in a very highly regulated environment. So our first responsibility is do no harm. So how do you balance the two from your perspective, Aida?
Yeah, so agree, Samir. I think while speed is super important, it's never more important than the safety of the patient. So but I think in terms of balancing the speed and safety, that gives us also the innovation part, meaning that there is an opportunity that for us to innovate in pathways that can lead us to, responsible, but at the same time accelerate in order to deliver those life-saving medicines and vaccines in a timely manner. again, without compromising the fundamental need for patient safety. So I think in all that is adopting a risk-based strategy or approach where you are leveraging the regulatory innovation pathways, like in the FDA, for example, the breakthrough therapy designations, where you can accelerate timelines, again, really not compromising the safety. So I'm sure Robert B will take us through some of these things, is that how AI tools really can help us, like, pre-screen, whether it's submissions, but at the core of it, of course, the human oversight is going to remain critical. And I think, in terms of implementing from, whether it's serialization, this blockchain, cloud-based traceable systems, and so on, which are very important to have that visibility. And I'll let Robert B, of course, in his area of expertise to talk about that. But I think to your point is that definitely innovation is important when you're thinking about balancing the speed and safety.
Yeah. Robert, if you want to add some more color.
Sure. So for me, it starts, first of all, like we said, with the patient, right? And with the patient, it comes data. So data is the bloodline of everything we do. So it's not just about the systems. It really is about making sure that our data is clean, that people can access it, because always we agree that garbage in is garbage out. So we can go fast and we can get to an answer fast, but if the data is not right, we're still going to get to the wrong answer. We're just going to get there faster. So if you think about the technologies and the scale that we work at from a Pfizer perspective, it's very large scale, right? We've got millions and millions of data everywhere, right? And we do what, 40, 50,000 submissions a year, millions of adverse events a year. So we are always working at scale. That doesn't mean that we can't innovate and work at speed, because when we do use technologies like things in the cloud, when we're doing things with AI to automate, this allows us to move faster. It allows us to keep the quality, but it also allows the human interaction to get in there and verify that it's called trust but verify, right? And make sure that whatever we're putting out, that is definitely traceable, and that when we get a regulatory agency come in, we can prove exactly how we got to where we got to. I think one of the biggest challenges we're going to have with AI and all these algorithms is the ability to be able to trace back exactly what was actually developed. And I think that's one of the concerns that people have right now in terms of trust of AI, in terms of taking the human out of the loop. This is why the human has to remain in the loop to verify, to be able to justify the algorithms that we're using. But our ability to be able to go fast is not limited by the amount of things that we're doing, is limited by making sure that our data is in the right place and that it can be accessed as quickly as possible.
Thank you. And we'll talk a little bit about trust later in our conversation, Robert, right?
Yeah.
But I just want to pick up the piece you said Pfizer is all about scale, and you do about 45,000 submissions, right? That's humongous. And for companies of similar nature, right, who may be dealing with the volume of submissions as well as the complexity, especially in the global model, what are the kind of systems or innovations that can help pharma to maintain consistency, compliance, and traceability? Robert, if you want to take that one first.
Yeah, so our focus is on platforms and scale, right? Focus more on simplicity. Instead of having every rainbow and the color on the docket, it's like, how can we get to scale where everybody's using the same thing? Because when we do submissions, for example, now, we try to do global submissions that impact, Asia, the US, and Europe all at the same time. In order to do that, you have to have platforms that talk to each other, and that we don't have specific things that people want their one thing to be in the system. It's like, so we're pushing platforms and scale big time. Cloud is a big part of that, and making sure that people get access to the systems as simply as possible. So when I think about moving fast, I think about simplicity. Some people think about complexity. What we're trying to do is eliminate as much complexity as possible and make that one button push easier and easier for our colleagues working through the system. That also requires a level of AI fluency and technology fluency. So we're asking everybody to raise their technical skills. It used to be that everyone working in our company and across the board were expected to do whatever their job was, but technology wasn't one of the requirements. Now it's expected that everyone can be fluent in their technology, whether it's your laptop, your phone, your iPad, and all the AI tools that are available. It's going to be table stakes for people to be able to get there and maneuver through it, whether they're using Copilot or ChatGPT or whatever the tools are that make their lives more productive. It also then simplifies and speeds up the process for getting things out the door. So that's one of the things that has definitely changed from when I first started doing technology, where the expectation of our business partners were, hey, we'll take care of the technology, you just worry about the requirements. And I was like, no, you need to understand what the technology is doing, because it can get very dangerous when you push that button if you don't exactly know what is happening behind the scenes.
That's very interesting. And the other piece, you talked about scale, Robert, right? In the last 1, 2 years, what's it started? Everybody's done pilots and proofs of concept,
Mhm.
but then I call it pilot purgatory, right? You There's so many pilots, and now
Yep,
what do we do from here? So it's not more about the scale. Otherwise, there's no point of doing this, right? If you're
exactly.
not able to do that scale. Ida, your perspective on what you just heard from Robert?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to add one more thing is that I think not to see the technology separate from, what we are trying to do,
Right.
let's say in medical and safety. I think that the partnership we talked about that is that this is a proactive and bidirectional, meaning that you can't
Mhm.
expect those that are experts in technology to help you very late in the game, right? So it's got to be in the inception, very early on. And I think even though I think we think about, we've been using AI tools for quite a long time, but maybe not as much in the healthcare, right? So
Mhm.
I think it's very important that we are integrating it early. And the other thing is not only during the development process, implementation, but even beyond. So I think it's really in the real world, how are these things performing and be able to take that back in. And I think this is why it's so important to work side by side with people who have those expertise and be able to bring all the different ideas and be able to really be focusing on the same, going on to the same direction to solve a specific problem.
Yeah.
What I'm
Yes. I just
hearing
want to add
both,
one quick
sorry.
one to that, Samir, because when you mentioned earlier about failing fast and all of these pilots. So our objective is to get to the answer as quickly as possible on whether it can scale and move the needle or not, right? So that we're not in pilot mode forever. So this point about getting to a point where it's like, is it going to work or it's not? And if it's not, throw it off the shelf and let's move on to the next thing. Whereas when you got thousands of pilots just running and none of them are actually coming to fruition, to me, that's worse.
Mhm.
No, thank you. And what I'm hearing you, Robert and Ida, there used to be a time when this is technology and this is business, and never the twain shall meet. But what you guys saying, technology is coming more here. So I need to know more, understand the business perspective. And what
Yep.
I'm hearing Ida says, I need to understand what technology is capable of. Right, so then we can drive a much more effective partnership, right? So the lines getting a little blurred, and both of you are trying to meet each other halfway across, right? Ultimately, that gets the best results. Both sides appreciate the other side's position.
Yep.
Awesome. I'm going to shift gears a bit. I'm going to pick up the thread Robert talked about trust and verify. And I thought it'll
Mhm.
be important in today's context, right, to talk a little bit about the safety and in the context of making sure that whatever tools that we are using are reliable and trustworthy. Right, and not just in the lab setting, in the pilot setting, but when truly get to scale in the real world scenario. So, Ida, what would be the kind of advice you would have for people to make sure they actually are able to provide the confidence when things are scaling up, that everything is actually performing as per expectations?
I think we touched a little bit on this. I think trust begins with context-specific validation. I think there's got to be transparency, accountability. I think this is important to understand. I think Robert, we mentioned in terms of explainable AI, what do we understand? Is there transparency in terms of how this model even came about and what data set is it using? And also very early on, because I think the goal is to have a regulatory success. So we do need to have that regulatory engagement and feedback. That's also very important. And many, of course, companies now have governance, but you don't want to have governance for the sake of governance. You want it to be robust and effective because you don't want also to stifle, as we said, like innovation. So it's got to be really important as you are building these tools because they do require maintenance, right? They do require proactive mitigation processes and so on. So I do think that trust begins with really that validation and transparency. And I think really prioritizing so many things, like, we talked about bias a little bit. I think we just mentioned and passed on, but how good is your data? It's not about the quantity only that we need to think about, the quality, the diversity of data sets. And the other important factor, again, that we mentioned is having humans in the loop in these systems is key.
No, and I'll give Robert a chance, but the whole piece, we've heard so much about hallucination that the data just, sometimes the machine just create data which doesn't exist. So very important to actually do a data fact check, make sure the humans in the loop are validating all the information that's being presented, right? So it's not just taking what is being presented to you. So what's the perspective from the technology side, Robert?
Yeah. Well, you start with quality first, right? If quality is built in from the beginning, and like Aida said earlier, not at the end, at the last minute, right? Then you can kind of trust that the data that you're generating can be counted on. But you also have to remember that humans are still part of this development, right? That it's not just the machines being developed by themselves. So you're still going to have biases in the place. You're still going to have inefficiencies in the place as long as the humans involved. But when we combine the technology and the human together, we start to eliminate that potential error that could happen. So what I'm looking at is more complementary of technology, quality, and humans working together to make the quality much better. But remember that there are things that will always be there as long as there's a human in the loop. But I think that the margin of error is becoming less and less.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll explore the theme about human in the loop and what does it mean for jobs later on, because that's obviously top of a lot of colleagues' mind. Let's take a little bit of a segue and talk about the regulatory agencies. And Ida, you talked a little bit about at the time of the vaccine launches and so on. And I felt they did a brilliant job because they changed processes and systems and themselves for the benefit of humankind, right? Sometimes I feel they did not get enough credit. But now that a couple of years have passed and the technology is really advanced, AI and drug discovery, digital therapeutics, what are kind of the gaps that you feel regulatory bodies still have? And then is there a possibility for pharma to help collaborate and fill some of these gaps, even as regulatory bodies take time to come up to speed and get educated and have regulations out?
Yeah, I think it's the, where the technology and science is, right? So regulators, pharma, everybody has to use, in terms of the quality of the science and where the technology is at. Certainly there is challenges, of course, regulators being, of course, public health and the role of regulation and pharma trying to develop, the next solution or breakthrough and so on. So I think it's important that there is proactive and transparent relationship between both parties to close the gap that exists today. I think in terms of getting to the technology, certainly I think the complexity that one faces is, we talked about this, is when you have these AI systems that you don't know where they came from, right? You don't have, there is opacity there and you don't understand. So I think this can create, of course, the difficulty in terms of how they work to ensure their safety and effectiveness, right? That could make it hard for regulators. And the other thing is, traditional regulatory pathways for whether it's drugs or medical devices are not always applying AI-driven software, right? Such as apps that even in a diagnostic, let's say. So those are also some things that need to be updated, or how these things are evolving. So I think very important to have that open, engaging dialogue throughout the development process. Again, here too, very early, not just wait until the submission, but very early to have that feedback early as things are evolving. So that in this ecosystem, so one can identify and solve potential regulatory hurdles and issues before you get really to the submission part. And I'll go back and anchor on science, since I think this is very important, is that from a regulatory perspective, there needs to be a promotion for regulatory science research as well. Like, I think, how do you use the real world evidence and advanced analytics to inform decision making, right? Because at the end, we have to make these decisions. And this can exist in the pre-competitive space, for example. So I think that is very important to also advance that as we are thinking the things that are in clinical use and development, but we also have to think of the pre-competitive space so that we can advance that type of scientific research.
Thank you. I was at a forum last week, and when we had an ex-FDA commissioner come in, I think you were there in the audience as well, and I think he re-emphasized that while they're responsible for policy, they're always rooting it in science, and that's the fundamental piece, right? Make sure there's data and evidence and so on. Robert, what was
Sure.
how would you react to what you just heard?
Yeah, I is spot on. I'm coming at it from this perspective because I've had an opportunity to work with our regulatory agencies from a technology standpoint for many years. And prior to, I would say, the last 5 years, there was a lack of investment in our regulatory agencies' technology. And as fast as we wanted to move, whether we were doing submissions in the cloud or submitting adverse events electronically, whatever the case may be, we found that our regulatory agencies were not keeping up. But at least with this administration and just recently, our investment in technology and the regulatory agencies is going to help the entire process to move at speed and pace. If you think about all the cyber incidents that are going on, as well as what people are trying to advance in technology, if our regulatory agencies don't keep up with the private industry in terms of the investment, I don't care how fast we go. When we go to make that submission, if they aren't where they need to be, that process slows down to a complete halt again. So what we're really starting to observe is that collaboration and partnership with the regulatory agencies and the private industry, which we really didn't have before. And there's more openness to want to work together and to be able to build an environment that's out there in a cloud, for example, where everybody's using it and everyone's accessing it. And we don't have a separate solution for the regulatory agencies versus what we're trying to do on the pharma industry or the healthcare industry as a whole. So that's probably the biggest change that I've seen, and that's going to have to work hand in hand as we go forward.
No, exactly, Robert. I think the pace of change has been just phenomenal, right? The advancements which have happened last couple of years. So if the partnership is not truly collaborative, right, all of us wouldn't learn from each other and grow for the
Exactly.
betterment. So I'm going to change gears again, Ida, Robert. Right, let's talk a little bit about people. You mentioned ultimately it's about the people who are not going to go away, right? Human in the loop, as you talk. Let's take two angles, right? So the first, take the leadership angle of both of you, where you have a responsibility to the business, responsibility to patients. So how do you actually recruit and grow talent which has not only the domain but also the technology skills, right? So that ultimately you are able to get the best out of them, right? So Robert, if you want to tackle that one first.
Sure. Yeah, so I currently run our early talent development program across Pfizer, where we are constantly looking for talent. And, we every year we bring in about 25 to 30 colleagues in, and we have over 4 to 5,000 applicants that apply, and it just blows me away. So, from a couple of perspectives, one, our values. What's important to us in terms of the colleagues we bring in, and our values of excellence and courage and joy and things of that nature are very important. We start there. Then we move into the ability to want to rapidly engage in technology to determine if it's going to scale or if it's going to work. And so, Samir, you said it earlier, it's like, don't be afraid to fail, right? It's okay to fail because the steps are so new and fabulous now and it's moving so fast that you've got to be willing to accept wherever that is and where it takes you from that perspective. When we start to recruit that talent, like I said, the basic skills of knowing how to use tools and technology are table stakes now. Whereas before it was like, oh, well, we come in and you can learn at your pace. It's like, no, those basic skills to be able to maneuver are absolutely critical in order for you to be successful. And then I would then couple that with the ability to understand the business. So that business acumen and being able to sit down with an AIDA and talk about medical inquiries or talk about adverse events and really understand what that process is, that allows you as a technologist to be able to develop solutions that will, one, be effective to our patients. It will be simple, and it won't be something that's so complex people can't figure out how to use it. So those are the things that we try to look for in that early talent, is that passion for what they do. And that goes with the patients being up front. And then you couple that with that technology and those skills and those basic things. And then it becomes learning that business acumen that makes what I would say going to be the future leaders of the world for us from a pharma standpoint.
Thank you, Robert. Ida, how have you approached the talent and domain skills perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you are only as good as your team, right? In terms of building that leadership and certainly thinking about the pipeline and the future, because that is really important for the organization to address whatever it's facing and even to survive the future, right? So I think in this day and age, one would be looking for, especially in pharma, is these what we call T-shaped professionals, that you have a deep expertise in one domain, but you have to be able to cross borders as well, broad across other areas. And investing in these training programs is very important. As we said, partnership, of course, from academia, because talent can come from many different places. So you always have to have an open mind, and internally having that growth, having a very clear engagement of the teams, providing that professional and sort of training as well as fellowship, right? I think Robert B mentioned that was some of the exciting times actually, where you are interacting with very early talent, and actually it helps our leaders as well, ourselves. I mean, it's kind of rejuvenates, reinvigorates, to be able to listen the kind of questions they ask.
Mhm.
It really is helpful to create that kind of culture and community, because it's very important to think about how you're developing talent.
Yep.
Robert and Ida, the way I've applied it, my business is I've created like pods. So I have people who are pretty much fresh out of college, 1, 2 years of experience. So they have no
Mhm.
background, so they have no inhibition. So they are willing to
Right.
challenge everything. And I marry them with folks who have huge amount of domain experience,
Yep.
right? And then the model, when it works, it works exceedingly well because both complement each other. These guys challenge the status quo because they don't know
Exactly.
any better, right? Just 1, 2 years out of college. And these
Yep.
guys know the domain very well, but they don't know the tech, and sometimes,
Mhm.
right, are not as willing to experiment. When you get the both together, it's phenomenal, right?
Yep.
The magic happens. So just getting the
No,
two
that's
together.
you're spot on there because, like you said, for the tenured folks, it's like, well, we've always done it this way. And like you
Yeah.
said, the young folks coming in, they're like, why are you doing it that way? It is so much easier to do it this way. So, like you said, when those two come together, it really works out.
Yeah. I
So
think you can get some of them, in fact, become champions, right? To really
Mhm.
help, really break that kind of barrier.
exactly. Let's pivot. What would be your advice to folks who are doing it day in, day out, who are listening in and perhaps rightly so are afraid of their jobs? What would be your advice to them with all the uncertainty coming their way, all the noise around, and so on? What would be a key message you'd like them to take away, Aida?
Yeah, I think it's we need first we need to acknowledge the fear, right? I mean, there is a fear of job displacement, which is becoming like the real primary driver and resistance actually to implement these new technologies. So I think again, going back, communication from leadership is the first step. And the other thing is, as leaders, also, we need to not only be the advocates, but we need to use these technologies. We need to show that we are actually actively also using them. And the other thing is explaining why, right? Why always helps. I think to embrace new technology means also if one can see a clear path for them, of professional growth and why we are using it, as well as like giving them ownership in this transition phase is important. I think these are some of the, what we can call human-centric approach, because I think that's what we need to address some of these resistance and fear that exists, and certainly clear, especially in the kind of a job that we do, right? Especially those things that require repetitive type of activities. I think it's, giving clarity that where you're shifting their roles. I think
Right.
shifting from these repetitive type of tasks, to a higher task, maybe in, analysis or strategy. So I think the clearly communicating why and how this is important, empowering and involving them in this change, I think is important.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, so I would start by saying, hey, embrace it because it's not going to stop, right? So instead of fighting it, get on the train. The other thing that is going to be really obvious to people soon is that there are going to be new jobs that are going to be also coming. It's not just old jobs that are going to go away. There are going to be new things that people can embrace and take advantage of. I mean, think about it. When we went from the mainframe to the PC, when we went from the PC to the internet, we went from the internet to the phone, right? These were major technology changes. Now, AI is moving more rapidly than any of those other changes, but I think it's going to create more opportunities for people that they are not expecting. And,
Mm.
so if you embrace that and just get on the train and just keep going with it, I think people are going to be pleasantly surprised at the things that are going to be available to them as they go into the future.
And that's exactly the mindset with which I'm asking my team members to approach this as well, right? So go with an open mind. First, the internet happened, then the cloud happened. We still survived
Right.
as a human race, right? I'm pretty certain we'll still be around. And possibilities that our roles may get elevated, right?
Right.
Writers may become reviewers, new ones will come up, agent trainers, and so on. Anyway, it's been phenomenal, this conversation. I'm losing track of time, but let's come back just to wrap a bit. I'm going to ask you guys to put the crystal ball in, right? And it was generative AI, and now everything is about agentic
Yep.
approach, right? So what's going to be the next 5 years, 10 years tech innovation, Robert, we should be very excited about? And how is that going to transform pharma? How do we develop, test, monitor, deliver medicines?
Yep.
I know it's a difficult one, but you go first, Robert.
Well, I tell you, Samir, if I had that answer, boy, I'd be a gazillionaire now. But, if I think, in terms of the horizon, like you said, AI, agentic AI, I'm looking at quantum. I think quantum is going to be another big change that we're going to impact us in terms of CPU utilization and then opening up these huge, huge data centers. And you guys probably have seen on the news in terms of OpenAI and Oracle and all of them are going to start building these huge data centers in order to house this compute power that we're going to need. And I think that is then going to then revolutionize a lot of what we do in the pharma industry and the medical industry, period, in terms of what tools and technology are going to be available, the speed at which we're working at it, as well as how those things come together in light of all the things that are happening right now. So I think there's, a significant wave coming, not only with AI, but with quantum. And I think that's going to be, from my perspective, the next technology that's going to push us over the edge.
Yeah, I can see all the investment being made. So I'm excited for one to see what that has in store for us. Ida, what excites you?
I'm excited let me bring back the practicality and the reality only because of where I exist, is that I cannot wait for how we are going to be solving, right? Using these tools. I think, there are so many things in our world, definitely, that we have not really even touched. Like, we are at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to solutions for patients. So I'm super, super excited in terms of that. When Robert V tells us that it's from months, years, we are going into seconds and minutes, that also
Yep.
means the lives, right? That we are able to really make a difference and impact. So I'm super excited to be in this time, in this inflection time, to be part of working with people like yourselves, in this technology, and to really implement and deliver. So that is exciting for me. So it's kind of like the sci-fi movies that we used to watch, but it's becoming a reality.
It
Reality.
is indeed.
Yeah.
Robert and Ida, I know we date ourselves, but we might be the only generation who started with the rotary phone and end up with quantum computing on the other
Okay.
side, right? So we have seen the entire gamut. But anyway, audience members, I know I really enjoyed the last 35 odd minutes I spent with Robert and Ida. We covered a lot of ground. We covered their backgrounds. We talked about specific examples. We spent time understanding the piece about trust, right? We talked about change management, and then finally they gave us a sense of what could be out there in the future. In the few minutes that we have left, I'd love to take one or two audience questions, Robert and Ida. And I like this one, and I'll ask perhaps Ida to take a stab at this first. And this one is around collaboration, right? So, does everything need to be done in-house, or can we look at collaborations between startups and academia and tech as the best path of innovation? And I think, especially with the vantage point that you have, Ida, we'd love to hear your side.
Yeah, I mean, this question about building things entirely, whether it's in-house or exclusively depending on external collaboration. I think it's neither, and I think it's very important to do both. I do think, I mean, always thinking about the context and the problem one is trying to address. I think I always like to think about the end game, right? The goal. I think focusing on that and what do you need? What kind of solution do you need to bring in? So in order to address what is the best path forward. So I do think the optimal would be a hybrid because how else would you know if your partnership is actually as good as it is that you think, right? So I think one has to definitely leverage external expertise because you can't do it all. and then it will take you away from some of your focus and your strategy and so on. So I do think for rapid innovation, while developing these targeted internal capabilities also to maintain this control and understanding overseas partnership is important, but leveraging excellent partnership, and I've been at that, I think is so important. So I do think about a hybrid approach. Sometimes you've got to have more of the partnership, and sometimes you got to have internal. And it also depends, I guess. I mean, I lived in a big pharma, so it may be different when you're thinking about a small biotech or where there's a focused, where you need something very differently. But I think where I've lived is that this hybrid model was a good approach, and certainly dependent also because you're addressing so many different issues, right? We have so many, as Robert V mentioned, is so many submissions, so many different things that arise that would require partnership, and some of them require an internal solution.
Awesome. Robert, how have you approached partnerships?
Yeah, so you need them all, right? You need the internal expertise. You also need key partnerships. And when I use the word key, right, because everybody's trying to do this thing. And I think more so than ever, having your key partners that you've had with you for many years, and we have our key partners, is strengthening that partnership so that we can move even faster. But the ability for us to just go out there and just do it all on our own is going to be impossible, So having the ability to have a key partnerships, the internal expertise that you need, and bringing those two together, I think is the winning formula.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Robert and Aida. Like I said, time passes quickly when you're having fun, and I certainly had a lot of fun. With that, I'd like to get this panel discussion to a close. Our attempt was that getting two of you together, right? You sit at the intersection of science, safety, and technology. And with you, we explored a lot about how innovation is changing pharma, what does it mean for patients, and more importantly, where we are headed. I, for one, are certainly very excited about the years to come. I'm sure the audience members leave much more informed as well. But thank you so much for your time and the partnership. And the audience members, please make sure you attend all of the other sessions we have for you guys today. I'm sure they'll ignite some spark of innovation in your mind. But thank you so much, Robert and Aida. I'll let you go.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.